Dr. Ethan Cross had attended exactly 3 formal diplomatic events in his 34 years of life, and all of them had been faculty dinner parties, where the most exotic thing served was wine that cost more than $20 a bottle. The Grand Conclave of Andromeda was making those gatherings seem quaint by comparison. Just try not to accidentally start an interstellar war, Ambassador Chen had told him during their shuttle ride to Nexus Prime. And for the love of everything sacred, don't touch anything that glows, moves, or looks at you funny. Sound advice, considering Ethan was currently surrounded by beings whose biology defied everything he'd learned in graduate school. To his left, a crystalline entity from the Helix Nebula was having what appeared to be a heated argument with its own reflection in a champagne glass. To his right, a delegation of gaseous beings had somehow figured out how to maintain cohesion in atmosphere while wearing what looked like formal evening wear made of contained lightning. This is either the most amazing thing I've ever seen or the most elaborate hallucination in human history, Ethan muttered, accepting a glass of something that sparkled and tasted like starlight mixed with good whiskey. The Grand Conclave rotated hosting duties among member civilizations, and this year's Andromedans had outdone themselves. Nexus Prime wasn't just a space station. It was a work of art that happened to be capable of supporting 30,000 beings from across the galaxy. The main reception hall stretched for what felt like miles, its living crystal walls shifting color in response to the emotional states of the occupants. Gardens floated in carefully controlled gravity fields, their alien plants singing harmonies that made Ethan's teeth tingle pleasantly. Dr. Cross. The voice belonged to Director Martinez, the head of Earth's Xenobiological Research Initiative, and the reason Ethan was here instead of safely back in his lab, cataloging soil samples from Proxima Centauri. How are you finding the accommodations? Educational, Ethan replied diplomatically. I'm starting to understand why you needed someone with a background in interspecies communication patterns. Half the conversations I'm overhearing are being conducted in languages that exist purely in electromagnetic frequencies. That's why you're here. The diplomatic corps is excellent at negotiating trade agreements and territorial disputes, but we need someone who understands how different species actually think. Martinez gestured toward the crowd with obvious pride. This is the largest gathering of galactic civilizations in recorded history. 47 species, 12 different forms of consciousness, and enough collective military power to reshape galaxies. Ethan followed Martinez's gaze, automatically cataloging the different delegation clusters. The Andromedans moved in perfect synchronization, their actions coordinated by shared consciousness. The Helix entities seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, flickering between dimensions mid-conversation. The machine intelligences from the outer rim maintained perfect geometric formations that probably conveyed meaning he couldn't interpret. And then there was the delegation that made everyone else seem mundane by comparison. The Vorthak Empire's representatives occupied the center of the hall not through any formal protocol, but because other beings unconsciously created space around them. Ethan had read the classified briefings, knew that the Vorthak were considered the galaxy's most formidable warrior culture, but academic knowledge hadn't prepared him for the reality of their presence. They were beautiful in the way that perfect predators were beautiful, elegant, dangerous, and absolutely confident in their superiority. The males of the species stood nearly 8 feet tall, their movements carrying the fluid grace of trained fighters. But it was their queen who dominated the space without apparent effort. Queen Lyrale moved through the diplomatic crowd like she owned not just the room, but the concept of rooms in general. She stood 7 feet tall even without the elaborate headdress that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight, her skin holding a subtle luminescence that reminded Ethan of moonlight on deep water. Her features were sharp enough to suggest otherworldly beauty while maintaining an alien quality that prevented human eyes from fully processing her as familiar. That's Queen Lyrale, Martinez said, following Ethan's gaze. The Vorthak Empire has been isolationist for the past 3 centuries. Her presence here is unprecedented. Why the change in policy? Nobody knows. The Vorthak don't explain themselves to other species. They show up, they negotiate from a position of strength, and they leave. Queen Lyrale has been in power for 15 years, and this is the first time she's attended a galactic gathering. Ethan watched the Queen navigate a conversation with the Andromedan collective consciousness. Her responses perfectly timed despite the fact that she was essentially talking to a hive mind that communicated faster than individual thought. She's good at this. She's terrifying at this, Martinez corrected. Every agreement she's negotiated in the past 6 hours has been favorable to the Vorthak, and the other parties seem grateful for the privilege of making concessions. Skilled diplomat or masterful intimidation. Both. The Vorthak don't make distinctions between the two concepts. As if sensing their discussion, Queen Lyrale's attention shifted briefly toward their corner of the reception hall. Ethan felt the weight of her regard like a physical presence. Golden eyes that seemed to catalog everything about him in the space of a heartbeat, before moving on to more important concerns. Did she just assess you as a potential threat and dismiss you as irrelevant? Martinez finished. Probably. Don't take it personally. Queen Lyrale has been doing that to everyone who isn't commanding a fleet or representing a major trade consortium. Ethan continued watching the Queen work the room with professional fascination. Her diplomatic style was unlike anything in human experience, direct without being aggressive, confident without being arrogant, and somehow managing to make other species representatives eager to please her despite offering nothing in return, but the opportunity to avoid her displeasure. She's magnificent, he said quietly, more to himself than to Martinez. What? Nothing, just academic appreciation for superior diplomatic technique. Ethan finished his drink, enjoying the pleasant warmth that spread through his chest. I should probably mingle, collect some behavioral observations for my report. Good idea, just remember. Don't touch anything glowing, don't start any wars, try not to embarrass the human species, Ethan recited. I've got it covered. Martinez moved off to network with other delegation heads, leaving Ethan free to pursue his anthropological interests without supervision. He spent the next hour in what he privately called academic heaven, observing interaction patterns between species that had never been documented in human literature. The way gaseous beings negotiated through controlled atmospheric pressure changes. How the machine intelligences used geometric positioning to convey emotional subtext. The subtle dominance displays that the various humanoid species employed without conscious awareness. And through it all, Queen Lyrale remained the center of attention without seeking it, the gravitational force around which other conversations orbited. The champagne was definitely affecting his professional objectivity, but Ethan found himself studying her with the same fascination he usually reserved for particularly interesting bacterial cultures. The way she held herself suggested someone accustomed to command, but her responses to other delegates showed genuine intelligence rather than mere arrogance. She's the most magnificent queen I've ever seen, he murmured, lost in professional admiration and possibly expensive alcohol, which was when she turned. Not quickly, not with surprise or alarm. Queen Lyrale turned toward him with the deliberate grace of someone who had heard every word and was now choosing to acknowledge the speaker. Her golden eyes met his across the crowded reception hall, and Ethan realized with growing horror that Vorthak hearing was apparently much better than human intelligence estimates had suggested. The entire hall seemed to notice the Queen's focused attention. Conversations faltered, beings turned to follow her gaze, and suddenly Ethan Cross, xenobiologist, academic, and generally invisible member of the human delegation, found himself the center of attention at the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Oh, he said quietly, This is bad. The silence that followed Queen Lyrale's attention was the kind that preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or interstellar incidents. Ethan stood frozen as 300 of the galaxy's most powerful beings turned to see what had captured the Vorthak Queen's interest, their conversations dying mid-sentence like dominoes falling in reverse. Queen Lyrale began moving toward him, not walking, gliding. Her movements carried the kind of predatory grace that made Ethan's hindbrain scream warnings about apex predators, while his academic mind noted the perfect efficiency of her motion. She covered the distance between them without seeming to hurry, her retinue of advisors and guards flowing behind her, in formations that managed to look both ceremonial and lethally practical. Dr. Cross, Ambassador Chen appeared at his elbow with the desperate expression of someone watching their career dissolve in real time. What exactly did you do? I complimented her diplomatic technique, Ethan whispered, his eyes never leaving the approaching queen. Quietly, to myself, how was I supposed to know she could hear me from across the hall? The Vorthak have enhanced auditory capabilities, Chen hissed. It's in the briefing materials you were supposed to read. I read the biological overview. Nobody mentioned superhearing. It's in the cultural sections under things that will get you killed if you ignore them. Queen Lyrale had covered half the distance, and Ethan could see other beings stepping aside to create a clear path. The crystalline entities went completely transparent, the gaseous beings dispersed to avoid physical contact, and even the machine intelligences reconfigured their formations to avoid blocking her approach. Should I run? Ethan asked desperately. Running from a Vorthak queen would be considered either an insult worthy of war or evidence of cowardice worthy of contempt, Chen replied grimly. Neither option ends well for you or Earth's diplomatic standing. So what do I do? Try not to die. And whatever happens, remember that your behavior reflects on our entire species. No pressure, Ethan muttered. Queen Lyrale came to a stop 3 feet away, close enough that Ethan could see the subtle patterns of bioluminescence beneath her skin and smell something like ozone mixed with exotic spices. Up close, she was even more intimidating, tall enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem she couldn't solve through superior firepower or political maneuvering. Dr. Ethan Cross, she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that made his name sound like poetry. Xenobiologist, University of New Geneva, specialist in interspecies communication patterns. The fact that she knew his credentials was either impressive research or terrifying surveillance capabilities. Your Majesty, I apologize if my comment was inappropriate. I meant no disrespect. You called me magnificent. Her golden eyes held his with unwavering intensity. In my culture, honest observation is valued above empty flattery. Tell me, Dr. Cross, what exactly did you find magnificent about my diplomatic approach? The question was clearly a test, though Ethan couldn't determine what the correct answer might be. Around them, he could feel hundreds of beings listening to every word, calculating the implications of this unprecedented interaction. Your technique, he said, falling back on academic honesty since political sophistication had already failed him. The way you navigate conversations with species that think in completely different paradigms. You adapted your communication style for the Andromedan collective consciousness, then shifted to accommodate the Helix entity's non-linear temporal perspective, all while maintaining consistent negotiating positions. It's like watching a master linguist work in real-time translation across fundamentally incompatible forms of consciousness. Something flickered in Queen Lyrale's expression, surprise perhaps or amusement. You were observing my negotiating techniques. Professional interest. I study how different species overcome communication barriers. Your approach is. He paused, realizing he was about to compliment her again. Academically fascinating. Academically fascinating. She seemed to taste the words, her head tilting slightly in what Ethan hoped was curiosity rather than the prelude to ordering his execution. Tell me, Dr. Cross, what other academic observations have you made about tonight's proceedings? It was definitely a test now, though whether he was being examined for intelligence, threat potential, or entertainment value remained unclear. Ethan glanced around at the watching crowd, then back at the Queen, whose attention felt like standing in a spotlight made of golden fire. The Helix entities are negotiating from a position of temporal advantage. They already know how tonight's agreements will affect future events, so they're optimizing for outcomes rather than immediate gains. The machine intelligences are running computational models on every conversation, but they're handicapped by trying to quantify variables that don't translate to mathematical expressions. And the gaseous beings from the outer rim are frustrated because their natural communication method involves atmospheric chemistry changes that nobody else can interpret properly. Queen Lyrale listened to his analysis with growing interest, her expression shifting from assessment to genuine engagement. Perceptive. And the humans. The humans are terrified they're going to accidentally start a war by using the wrong fork or breathing too loudly. Ethan replied honestly. Present company definitely included. That earned him what might have been a smile, though Vorthak's facial expressions were subtle enough that he couldn't be certain. Fear can be wisdom, Dr. Cross. Though in your case, it appears to coexist with intellectual curiosity that overrides practical caution. Academic hazard. I tend to find interesting subjects more compelling than personal safety. And you find me interesting. The question carried layers of meaning that Ethan's diplomatic training, such as it was, couldn't parse. From a xenobiological perspective, absolutely. The Vorthak have been isolationist for 3 centuries, yet you navigate multi-species diplomacy with apparent ease. That suggests either extensive preparation or natural adaptation capabilities that haven't been documented in human research. Or perhaps, Queen Lyrale said quietly, stepping closer, there are aspects of Vorthak culture that your research has not yet discovered. The comment felt significant in ways Ethan couldn't identify, loaded with implications that danced just beyond his understanding. Around them, he could sense the crowd's attention like physical pressure, beings from across the galaxy watching this interaction with fascination and growing speculation. Dr. Cross, the Queen continued, her voice carrying a note of decision, I find myself curious about human perspectives on interspecies relations. Would you be interested in joining me for a private tour of the station's diplomatic quarters? I believe there are aspects of tonight's proceedings that might benefit from academic discussion. The invitation hit the reception hall like a dropped bomb. Ethan could practically hear the collective intake of breath from beings that didn't necessarily breathe. The sudden spike of interest from delegates who were undoubtedly calculating the political implications of a human xenobiologist being singled out by the galaxy's most reclusive queen. Ethan looked toward Ambassador Chen, who was wearing the expression of someone watching a shuttle crash in slow motion. That would be an honor, Your Majesty. Excellent. Queen Lyrale gestured toward a corridor that led deeper into the station, her retinue immediately reorganizing to accommodate the new plan. I believe, Dr. Cross, that tonight may prove more academically fascinating than either of us initially expected. As they moved toward the diplomatic quarters, Ethan caught fragments of excited conversation in a dozen languages, species representatives already transmitting reports about this unprecedented development. Whatever had just happened, it was going to have consequences that extended far beyond academic curiosity. Your Majesty, he said quietly as they walked, may I ask why you're interested in human perspectives? Because, Dr. Cross, Queen Lyrale replied with what was definitely a smile this time. In 3 centuries of isolation, no one has ever called me magnificent and meant it as a purely academic observation. I find myself intrigued by the implications. The diplomatic quarters of Nexus Prime were designed for private negotiations between species that couldn't coexist in normal atmospheric conditions. As Queen Lyrale led Ethan through corridors that adjusted their environmental settings automatically, he found himself in spaces that seemed to exist partially outside conventional physics. These chambers were constructed by the Andromedan Collective, Queen Lyrale explained, her retinue maintaining discreet distance while remaining close enough to intervene if their queen required protection. They exist in quantum superposition until occupied, allowing them to accommodate any species' environmental requirements. Ethan watched walls shift from crystalline transparency to something resembling living wood as they passed through different sections. Adaptive architecture based on conscious observation. That's theoretically impossible according to human physics. Human physics is admirably precise within its limitations. The Queen replied with what he was learning to recognize as diplomatic amusement. The Andromedans find it charmingly concrete. They entered a chamber that settled into something resembling a fusion of human comfort and Vorthak aesthetics. Furniture scaled for beings of different heights, lighting that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, and gravity that felt subtly different from standard galactic norm. "Your guards," Ethan observed, noting how her retinue had positioned themselves. "They're not just protective, they're calculating threat assessments for every being we've encountered tonight. Perceptive. My people survive through superior preparation and tactical awareness." Queen Lyrale settled into a chair that molded itself to accommodate her height, gesturing for Ethan to take the seat across from her. "Though I suspect you've realized that Vorthak isolation has been somewhat selective. You've been watching, learning, gathering intelligence on every major species in the galaxy while maintaining the appearance of disinterest." Ethan felt pieces clicking together in his mind. "That's not isolation, that's strategic patience." "Very good. The question is, what does humanity intend to do with that knowledge?" The shift from casual conversation to political interrogation was so smooth that Ethan almost missed it. Almost. "I'm a xenobiologist, not a political strategist. I couldn't tell you what Earth's long-term plans are, even if I had security clearance high enough to know them. But you could tell me what humans think about the Vorthak based on your species' behavior patterns." Queen Lyrale leaned forward slightly, her golden eyes holding his with uncomfortable intensity. "Your Ambassador Chen, for example. He sees tonight's interaction as either opportunity or disaster, with no middle ground. Very human. You categorize outcomes in binary terms rather than accepting complexity. And your people? We categorize outcomes in terms of survival advantage, resource acquisition, and threat elimination. Also very binary but different parameters." Her expression softened slightly, "which is why I find your academic perspective refreshing. Because I'm looking at you as a fascinating subject of study rather than a political asset. Because you complimented my diplomatic technique without considering how that compliment might benefit you politically. In my experience, beings don't offer praise without expecting something in return." Ethan considered this, trying to parse the layers of meaning beneath her words. "So when I said you were magnificent, you meant it as genuine appreciation for skill, rather than calculated flattery designed to gain favor." Queen Lyrale stood, moving to examine what appeared to be a holographic display of the galaxy's current political boundaries. "When was the last time someone offered you honest feedback about your work, Dr. Cross?" The question caught him off guard. Academic peer review, I suppose. Other researchers critique my papers, suggest improvements. And outside your field?" Ethan thought about it seriously. "People don't generally comment on xenobiological research unless they're trying to get funding approved or arguing about resource allocation. Most humans find my work either boring or slightly disturbing." "Disturbing how?" "I study alien cultures with genuine fascination rather than fear or superiority complexes. That makes people uncomfortable. They prefer their xenobiologists to maintain professional distance, treat other species as interesting specimens rather than complex civilizations worthy of respect. Queen Lyrale turned from the display, her expression thoughtful. So you understand what it means to be intellectually isolated. Ethan paused, recognizing something in her tone that transcended species boundaries. Yes, I suppose I do. The Vorthak court values strength, honor, and tactical superiority above all else. These are necessary traits for survival, but they make for limited conversation partners. When every discussion focuses on military applications or resource acquisition, intellectual curiosity becomes irrelevant. You're lonely, Ethan said quietly, the realization hitting him with surprising force. Not personally, politically. You're surrounded by advisors who tell you what you want to hear and subjects who fear disappointing you, but nobody who challenges your thinking or offers new perspectives. An interesting interpretation. Queen Lyrale returned to her seat, but her posture had relaxed slightly. What would you suggest as a remedy for such theoretical loneliness? Honest conversation with someone who has nothing to gain from your approval and nothing to lose from your disapproval. Someone who sees you as intellectually fascinating rather than politically important. Ethan met her gaze steadily. Someone like a xenobiologist whose career doesn't depend on diplomatic success. And would such a person be interested in extended intellectual discourse? The question hung between them, loaded with implications that extended far beyond academic discussion. Ethan could sense the weight of decision in her voice, the careful balance between personal desire and political necessity. Hypothetically, he asked, hypothetically, such a person would probably find the opportunity irresistible, despite the obvious complications it would create for both parties involved. Queen Lyrale smiled, not the diplomatic expression she'd worn in public, but something warmer and more genuine. Complications can be invigorating. They force creative solutions to unexpected problems. Is that what this is? A problem requiring creative solutions. Dr. Cross, she said, standing again and moving toward the chamber's viewing port, which showed the swirling beauty of the galactic core beyond Nexus Prime. 3 hours ago, I attended tonight's reception planning to negotiate 3 trade agreements and assess potential military threats. Now I find myself considering whether Earth might be interested in hosting the first Vorthak cultural exchange program in 3 centuries. Ethan's breath caught. Cultural exchange. A single representative from each species, embedded in the other society for academic purposes. The Vorthak participant would study human social structures and communication patterns. The human participant would research Vorthak political organization and strategic philosophy. She turned back to him, her expression carefully neutral. Purely academic, you understand. No political implications. Of course, purely academic. Ethan's mind was racing through the implications. The opportunity to study Vorthak culture from the inside. The unprecedented access to information that could revolutionize human understanding of galactic politics. Though such a program would require participants with very specific qualifications. Indeed, the Vorthak representative would need to be someone with diplomatic experience and genuine interest in human society. Someone capable of bridging cultural gaps without compromising their people's security concerns. And the human representative would need extensive background in interspecies relations, ability to adapt to alien social structures, and enough intellectual curiosity to appreciate what they were experiencing rather than simply cataloging differences. Exactly. Queen Lyrale moved closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. It would also require participants willing to accept the personal risks involved in such unprecedented cooperation. What kind of risks? The kind that come from spending months in close contact with someone from a fundamentally different culture, sharing ideas and perspectives that might change how both parties see their place in the galaxy. Her golden eyes held his with unwavering intensity, the kind that come from discovering that intellectual compatibility transcends species boundaries. Ethan felt his pulse quicken as he recognized the subtext beneath her words. "Your Majesty, are you proposing?" "I'm proposing," Queen Lyreley interrupted gently, "that humanity and the Vorthak Empire consider a cultural exchange program that could benefit both civilizations. The specific details would need to be negotiated through proper diplomatic channels, naturally. Naturally, though if Earth were interested in such a program, I believe I know the perfect candidate for the human position. Someone with the right qualifications. Someone, she said with a smile that made his heart skip, who finds queens magnificent for purely academic reasons. Ethan laughed, feeling the tension of the evening transform into something resembling anticipation. "I think Earth might be very interested in such a program, Your Majesty. Very interested indeed." 3 months later, Ethan stood on the observation deck of the Thyros Royal Palace, watching twin moons rise over the Vorthak homeworld's crystalline canyons. The view was spectacular. Geometric cities that grew from living rock, atmospheric auroras that painted the sky in colors that had no names in human languages, and star formations that reminded him daily that he was very far from home. "The Festival of Twin Moons begins tomorrow," Queen Lyreley said, joining him at the railing. After months of working together, her presence no longer triggered his fight-or-flight response, though it still made his pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with interspecies diplomacy. "I've been reading about it in the cultural archives," Ethan replied, turning to face her. "Sacred celebration of duality and balance, very significant in Vorthak tradition. Sacred, yes, but also complicated." Lyreley moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could see the subtle bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin that indicated emotional states. Tonight, they were more active than usual, creating shifting designs that suggested nervousness or anticipation. "Complicated how?" "Tomorrow night, during the apex of the celebration, I must make certain announcements regarding the future of our alliance with Earth." Her golden eyes reflected the moonlight, making them seem to glow with inner fire. "Decisions that will affect both our peoples for generations to come." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Over the past 3 months, their professional relationship had deepened into something that transcended cultural exchange. Their daily briefings had become intellectual sparring matches. He looked forward to more than meals. Their formal discussions about human Vorthak relations had evolved into late-night conversations about philosophy, art, and the loneliness of leadership that knew no species boundaries. "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that require me to choose between tradition and progress, between the expectations of my people and the direction I believe our civilization should take." Lyreley turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "Ethan, these months with you have changed how I see the galaxy. Your perspective on cooperation versus domination, your belief that strength comes from understanding rather than conquest, these concepts are foreign to traditional Vorthak thinking. But not foreign to you." "No, not anymore." Lyreley's patterns flickered with what Ethan had learned to recognize as vulnerability, an emotion that Vorthak queens were traditionally forbidden from displaying. "Your reports to Earth have sparked unprecedented interest in Vorthak philosophy and art among human academics. Our cultural exchange has proven that cooperation can strengthen both civilizations without compromising either's identity." The Council of War Leaders disagrees. The Council sees any form of cultural integration as contamination of Vorthak purity. They view your presence here as a necessary evil, intelligence gathering that serves our strategic interests. Her voice carried a note of frustration that Ethan had rarely heard. "They don't understand that true strength comes from adaptability, not rigid adherence to ancestral prejudices." Ethan moved closer, recognizing the weight of leadership burden in her posture. "What will you announce tomorrow?" The establishment of permanent cultural exchange protocols between our species. Formal recognition that isolation has made us intellectually stagnant rather than strategically superior. Lyrale met his eyes directly, and other matters that will require me to challenge 3 centuries of tradition. Other matters. The Festival of Twin Moons is when Vorthak queens traditionally announce their choice of consort, the being who will stand beside them as both partner and advisor in leading our people toward the future. Her bioluminescent patterns were now pulsing in complex rhythms that spoke of decision and determination. This year, I intend to choose someone who represents the kind of future I believe the Vorthak should embrace. Ethan's breath caught as the implications hit him. Lyrale, you can't be serious. The political ramifications. The political ramifications will be significant regardless of my choice, she interrupted gently. The question is whether I choose based on fear of change or hope for something better. Whether I select a consort who reinforces traditional thinking or one who challenges me to grow beyond the limitations of my upbringing. Your people will revolt. A human consort to a Vorthak queen, that's unprecedented in galactic history. Many worthwhile things are unprecedented until someone has the courage to make them precedent. Lyrale stepped closer, her voice dropping to the intimate register that had become familiar over their months together. Ethan, you once called me magnificent for my diplomatic technique. I've spent 3 months learning that the most magnificent thing about you isn't your academic credentials or your xenobiological expertise. It's your ability to see possibilities where others see only problems. I'm a xenobiologist from a mid-tier university who accidentally got invited to the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history, Ethan said weakly. I'm hardly consort material for the Queen of the Galaxy's most powerful warrior culture. You're the human who saw a Vorthak queen as intellectually fascinating rather than politically valuable, who spent 3 months helping me understand that true strength comes from wisdom rather than warfare. Lyrale reached for his hands, her touch warm and surprisingly gentle. You're the being who made me realize that love, romantic, intellectual, or otherwise, recognizes no boundaries of species or custom when it's real. The word love hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Ethan felt his heart racing as he processed everything she was saying, everything she was offering, everything she was risking. The Council will never accept it, he said finally. The Council will accept what their queen decides, or they will learn that challenging royal authority has consequences. Her smile carried hints of the steel that made her a legendary leader. Besides, War Leader Vextel has already expressed grudging approval for the cultural exchange program. He considers your strategic insights surprisingly sophisticated for a soft academic species. High praise coming from a Vorthak military commander. The highest. He's also pointed out that a human consort would provide valuable intelligence advantages and demonstrate Vorthak confidence in our ability to maintain cultural identity despite outside influence. Lyrale's expression softened, though I suspect his real motivation is that he's seen how much happier I've been these past months. Ethan looked out at the twin moons rising over the alien landscape, at the city lights that spelled out messages in languages he was still learning, at the future that stretched before them filled with impossible possibilities and beautiful complications. What would it mean, he asked quietly, being consort to a Vorthak queen? It would mean standing beside me as we navigate the challenges of bringing 2 species closer together, while maintaining the respect of beings who prefer conquest to cooperation. It would mean learning to balance human adaptability with Vorthak tradition, finding ways to honor both cultures while creating something entirely new. Her golden eyes held his with unwavering certainty. It would mean accepting that what started as academic curiosity has become something much more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. And personally, It would mean waking up every day beside the most intellectually stimulating being I've ever encountered. Someone who challenges my thinking, appreciates my complexities, and finds queens magnificent for reasons that have nothing to do with political advantage. Lyralay's bioluminescent patterns were now pulsing in harmonious waves that spoke of joy and anticipation. It would mean discovering together what happens when love transcends the boundaries that separate civilizations. Ethan felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders, a choice that would affect not just his life, but potentially the future relationship between two species. My academic career would be over. I'd never be able to return to anonymous research. You'd become the galaxy's foremost expert on human Vorthak cultural integration. Universities across a dozen systems would compete for the privilege of studying your work. Lyralay smiled. Though I suspect you'd be too busy helping govern an interstellar empire to worry about academic recognition. Governing. I don't know anything about ruling people. You know about understanding people, which is infinitely more valuable. The rest we can learn together. She moved closer, her voice becoming serious. Ethan, I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consider the possibility. If tomorrow night, when I announce my choice, you'd be prepared to stand beside me and help create the kind of future neither of our species has imagined. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. Not as the magnificent queen he'd observed from across a reception hall, not as the fascinating subject of xenobiological study, but as Lyralay, the being who had spent 3 months sharing her thoughts, fears, dreams, and perspectives with someone from an entirely different world, who had risked everything to pursue the possibility that cooperation might be stronger than conquest. 3 months ago, you were the most magnificent queen I'd ever seen, he said finally. Now you're the most magnificent person I've ever known. Queen, leader, intellectual partner, friend. He paused, meeting her gaze directly. And yes, I'm terrified of what that means for both of us. Fear can be wisdom, Lyralay said, echoing words she'd spoken months earlier. But courage is choosing to act despite the fear when the potential reward justifies the risk. And in this case, the potential reward is the chance to prove that love really can bridge any distance, whether measured in light years, cultural differences, or the space between two hearts that were never supposed to find each other. She touched his face gently, her skin warm against his. The chance to show the galaxy that the most powerful alliances aren't built on mutual fear or shared enemies, but on mutual respect and genuine affection. Ethan covered her hand with his own, feeling the electric thrill of connection that had nothing to do with interspecies biology and everything to do with recognition of kindred spirits. Tomorrow night, when you make your announcement. Tomorrow night, when I make my announcement, I hope to be able to tell my people that the human who once whispered about magnificent queens has agreed to help me become a magnificent leader of a civilization that's finally ready to embrace the future instead of hiding from it. Then I guess, Ethan said, his heart pounding with anticipation and absolute certainty, I better practice my Vorthak ceremonial protocols. Can't have the new consort embarrassing the queen at her own coronation celebration. Lyralay's laugh was like music, bright and joyful and filled with promise. I love you too, Ethan Cross, even if you did whisper it first. As the twin moons reached their apex above Theros, casting silver light over two beings from different worlds, who had discovered that the universe's most beautiful possibilities often began with the simplest observations, the future